nerds, what's up? So why didn't digital books ever fully take over? Now, that was a question that was plaguing everybody in the 2000s. I would know, I lived through it, where when ebooks became popular, everyone said physical media was dead and we would all be reading ebooks. And that just didn't happen. And as the publishing industry is constantly changing and evolving, I think we are all recognizing that we're kind of on another precipice with a lot of changes coming up. I wanted to back examine this kind of trend and see what we can learn from it. Because at the time, and even now, on paper, digital books seemed to make more sense. They were cheaper to produce, so they could technically be sold cheaper. They were better for the environment. They solved space issue, both in home and to travel. It was much easier to travel with ebooks. They could be bought any time of day or night. If you're binging a series and it's 11 p.m. and you want to buy the next one, you can. You can search through them to find things more easily. And they also have a lot of ways to deal with accessibility concerns, like changing font sizes or colors or font types. Now, there were some initial issues with digital books, but a lot of our e-readers that are specifically for that purpose have solved these issues, like e-readers that are like paper and you need light to see them, so the blue light isn't affecting you. Percentages to know how far you are through the book, so it kind of has that feeling of the physical book knowing where you are. And dedicated e-readers, I think, also don't have ways to they're not your phone, so you're not going to get notifications that will take you away from reading. In reality, ebooks had a meteoric rise, but once they took over a certain portion of the market, they ended up staying steady at around 20-ish% of that market. In fact, some recent data is actually showing that ebooks is taking up less of the market share than it used to as the buying of physical books has risen again. And of course, with audiobooks continuing to take a bigger portion of the market, especially in the last few years. So why? If ebooks were the future, why did it stop taking up a portion of the market share and then also start to drop? Well, we're going to talk about that after the jump. So very first, I've actually had this idea for a while. I've really wanted to look into it and really dig into the data. And I thought this data would be incredibly easy to find. It seemed very basic to just find out what the market share of physical audio and digital books were over a period of time. Nope. I found data everywhere, and so much of it just didn't say at all what its source was, which means I have no idea to know how it was collected or what it included. So I consider that pretty bad data. Or I found promises of the data I wanted behind giant paywalls. I'm talking $200 a month to read data I wasn't even sure was going to be the right, and I couldn't preview it or see if it had sources. I found it so frustrating that all of this data didn't include sources, and the one time I did find something that included a source, I couldn't really track it down. This is incredibly important because we need to know whether this book data is coming just from the giant publishers. Is it including Amazon, which right now has about 50% of the market share in all books and 65% in audiobooks? So if we don't have Amazon data, that's basically worthless. Is it including any sort of self-publishing stuff? Because that will also skew the data quite significantly, since in general, self-publishing is very high majority digitally read. I just want to show you some of the data I was dealing with just so we can all have a little laugh. This first graph is one of my favorites because, first of all, it doesn't sort any data, but it also says that the hard copy dominated book market was 73% share in 2024. And then it gives us this little pie chart of book market by share, which, first of all, the three blues in the legend are almost indistinguishable. So I don't even know which part of the pie each one accounts for. But if we assume it goes in order, it also just told me the hard copy was 73% share, and this pie graph is showing 33%. Can we talk about anything less trustworthy? And this was one of the first hits. This was supposedly trustworthy. I can't even believe it. This is a chart I found, again, no sources, and also it's talking about global sales in the billions. So it's talking about money made versus units sold, which is another issue because of price discrepancy. Do these physical book sales include special editions? Do these, what is included in there? They can be more expensive. So it's not really showing us an accurate market share of actual units sold, which would be a much better metric for what we're actually talking about here in terms of market sale now, or market share. Now, for other audiences, money or revenue made is going to be a more beneficial stat, but not for our purposes. So this is my favorite graph that I did find because it's actual units sold versus money made, and it does have a source, but I still couldn't track down how or what was exactly included in this data. From what I could find, these sources track physical sales and digital sales separately through MPD, and according to an unverified and unsourced number, that they believe they cover about 75% of the physical book market in 2009, which is so long ago to be an irrelevant statistic, even if it was sourced. As far as MPD PubTrack Digital, they list a number of publishers as where they get their information for ebooks from, which probably covers a majority of the traditionally published market, but I could not see any proof in the research that I did that they broadly included Amazon statistics in there. I'm guessing that's something that they don't give up, which means a lot, I think, would fall by the wayside, especially with the rise in self-publishing. So the percentage I gave in the intro, is that even true? I don't know. It's a commonly cited statistic. So I just want to be clear that we should probably take all of these statistics with a little grain of salt. I want to be talking about general trends, and I hope some of this data can give us an idea of general trends, but I'm just not necessarily sure it's actually super representative of the current book market. It's just incredibly important for me to always bring these up in videos when we are talking about data collection, because we have to make a lot of assumptions here, and assumptions can be wrong. And so, for example, in this total market share, which we are seeing in this graph, I'll display it again. We're seeing this height in about 2013, 2014 of ebook sales, which I think feels right. And then this kind of slightly slow decline as physical media has become more important into the early 2020s. Now, again, this also doesn't include audio, which maybe makes sense because it ended in 2021. And I feel like the audio has really been since 2020 on the upkick. I might be wrong about that. But I don't know if this chart includes Kindle Unlimited. I don't know if it includes all the Amazon books. We don't know what it includes. This might just be the big publishers. And if so, that means digital would be way underrepresented, in my opinion. I think if we're not including Amazon, digital is way underrepresented. So I also think it's interesting that we can't necessarily say for sure that digital did stop at that smaller market share. I know we've had an uptick of wanting physical media, but is it as big as we think? I don't know. Maybe the data isn't there, which was kind of a bummer. I also found this really interesting article by Slate during my research talking about how some companies may benefit from suppressing accurate reading statistics. It doesn't really have anything to do with what we're talking about today, but I thought it was an interesting read. So if you're curious, I'll leave that link below. But let's go on. Why physical books? Why do we think physical books didn't fully die? What's the different experience? Well, the act of reading a book feels very different when it is you holding a book and feeling it. It's tactile experience. You have a better knowledge spatially of where you are. There has been, as I mentioned previously a few times, a huge push for ownership of media and people realizing that you don't actually necessarily own digital content. There's been a huge talk about that recently with the way Audible has changed stuff around. I'm not an Audible user, so I don't know the specifics, but I've seen it around. When people talk about buying and downloading digital movies, can those be taken at any time? What's the ownership status? The other thing that maybe only bothers me is you can't lend out digital media like you can lend out physical media. I am a huge lender. I love sharing my books with people, and it always bothered me that you couldn't lend things digitally, except that you used to be able to. I feel like this is a false memory I only have, and I'm hoping some of you will come here and be like, I remember that too. I specifically remember, it must have been like 2011 or 2012, because I can remember the house I was living in when this happened. And my dad had a book I wanted to read on the Kindle app, and he lent it to me. It was a digital lend where he could send it to my account, and then he couldn't access it for 2 weeks while I had it and could read it. And that's how they dealt with lending, is that you couldn't access it at the same time that you had lent it out, which I remember at the time thinking that was so cool and that was the future. That doesn't exist anymore, right? I have not heard about this in years, and I am convinced it doesn't exist. You guys can tell me if I'm wrong, but that was a tirade. But yeah, when you don't own something, you don't really have control over it. There's also this idea that part of the reason that people like physical books as well is the idea of less screen time. And I've always kind of had that knowledge, but they specifically put this on millennials, which I think is very funny. Supposedly, millennials are the biggest reading groups. Again, that is all by survey, and people sometimes are bad self-reporters, but it has been reported a lot that millennials are the readers. Millennials are the generation currently having children, and millennials tend to be overly concerned with screen time. So they're going to probably be buying physical books for their children so that they aren't on screens, and also might be trying to model that behavior to their own children, and that might also bring them back to physical media. I can speak for myself. I mostly read physical media just because I don't really enjoy digital media. It's just really tough for me to read digitally. I just prefer it. But I did also notice, like, the times where I am reading a digital book, my kids treat it so differently, because to them, I'm on my phone, I'm on a device. That's all they see. They don't know the difference between me being like doom scrolling and reading a book. But when I'm sitting and reading a physical book, they recognize that I am reading and are much more likely to like sit next to me and read as well, or be like, Mom's reading, we'll do something else, than interrupt me. So I do think there's kind of like a perception difference between physical and digital reading as well. One thing that you might not realize is that physical media is just way better for libraries than digital media. It is incredibly more expensive for libraries to deal with digital content. I actually found this great article about this concerning the Seattle Public Library, which is important to me because I live in Seattle. So I was going to read some of this article because I think it's very illuminating. But the increasing demand for digital books is causing problems for local libraries. Last month, SPL announced it was reducing the number of digital holds patrons can place from 25 down to 10. The reason? Digital books are extremely expensive for libraries, even though they're generally cheaper than print books for an individual consumer. Gutierrez pointed to Britney Spears' 2023 memoir, The Woman in Me, as a prime example of the budget challenges that ebooks pose. SPL paid the book's publisher $17.81 for each physical copy it bought, a few dollars cheaper than what an individual would pay in a bookstore. Electronic copies were a totally different story. The ebook and e-audiobook are about $17 for a consumer, but the library paid more than 3 times that price, $64.99 for an ebook and $59.99 for a digital audiobook. Combine the increasing demand for digital books and the higher prices, and things add up quickly. In total, the library physical copies at one point were $2,500 that we had invested, Gutierrez said, but the digital copies cost us $35,000. That price tag is only the start of the story. Publishers largely don't allow libraries to own digital books outright. They have to license them for a set period of time or a set number of checkouts. In the case of The Woman in Me, each copy is only rented to the library for 2 years. Then they have to pay again to keep using it. It's like throwing money directly out a window, Courtney said. Speaking of prices, ebooks didn't stay as low as we expected. They are pretty expensive. Sometimes you can find physical versions of a book that are cheaper than the ebook. Now, this ended up having to do with the Department of Justice and a lawsuit against Apple and pricing that ended up kind of messing with pricing. I just decided I didn't want to go fully into it here, but there are articles about it. In some ways, it makes sense that there is a cap at how cheap a digital book can be, because even though we are saving money on distribution and physical media costs and shipping, authors and editors and the people involved with the book still need to be paid a decent wage. So digital books have to cost something, but they're clearly not as cheap as they could be for everyone to still get a fair price. And so I think sometimes people feel like, well, I could own this for the same price physically. Why don't I? As the market continues to change and evolve, there's one thing I thought about in conjunction with this whole ebook versus hard copy that we talked about, especially in the 2000s. And that's just how humans are bad at predicting trends. I read a book recently called Factfulness by Anna Rosling Runland, Hans Rosling, and Ola Rosling. In the book, it talked about how humans trend towards linear thinking, especially in trends. If we see a certain trend, we extrapolate automatically that it will continue in a linear growth. So in the 2000s, when we saw the atmospheric rise of ebooks, we automatically interpreted that to mean that ebooks would continue to rise over time in a linear rate and physical books would be wiped out. Now, in the context of the book, they were specifically talking about population growth, but they said, don't assume straight lines. Many trends do not follow straight lines, but are S-bends, slides, humps, or doubling lines. So as we talk about trends in general, it's really beneficial to change your mindset from, well, this will always be growing in the same way, versus we don't know when there will be a steep drop off, we don't know when there will be a hump, or we don't know when a new technology will come in and disrupt a trend line. So Amazon was a huge disruptor in the book industry. What's the next thing that might be a disruptor? Right now, I think we're looking a lot at self-publishing and how that might disrupt the traditional publishing market. We are also seeing audiobooks. I think they're going to continue to explode. And there's a lot of stuff up in the air about how people are paid for audiobooks, digital ownership in audiobooks, really around Audible. There's been a lot of coverage on that. How will that change the book industry? And will that people who listen to audiobooks, is that eating more into ebook sales or physical book sales, or both equally? I think it's difficult to say. What are the technologies that we haven't imagined yet that might change the way people consume books? Is it that graphic audio will be more on the rise? I don't know. Book reading is technically a trend right now. Book lovers just hate hearing that. I get it. We have to admit it. Like, book buying is a trend. Like, we have to admit it. Does that mean in the future that the desire for special editions will sharply decrease once it's no longer a trend? I feel like it's difficult to figure out. The one thing I'm curious about is, will there ever be a situation or something that changes culturally where physical media will no longer be something that we call after? So far, physical media has been decently stable in the book community, at least, with a rise recently, but that doesn't mean it'll always be that way. In conclusion, because you're probably like, what's the point? Aren't those your favorite videos of mine? I just think it's very interesting to look at trends and understand human nature and why we like the things we like, and understanding how trends go in the publishing industry. I'm curious because I have been resistant to change in terms of how I read. I read a lot digitally in college when I literally just did not have the space to own books, but it didn't stick for me. I found I just still vastly preferred physical reading and still do, whereas a lot of people in my family vastly prefer digital reading. So how is that going to change and evolve, and what does that mean for the landscape? I'm also obviously very curious about traditional versus indie publishing and how that's going to continue to change. So I'm always curious in trends, and I just am a bad predictor. So I never try to predict. I just look to the past to try to explain the future. As always, if you like these kind of deep dives, please like and subscribe. That is the best way to support me. And if you want to see what I'm currently reading, as well as other nerdy rants, you can check me out on Instagram at bookborn.reviews. I'll see you next time. Bye.